So, first of all, Maureen, would you like to join us? Maureen McDermott. Can I ask you a typical American question?
Uh-huh.
Where are you from?
I'm from the Dairy State.
Dairy State. That's Michigan?
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin, I'm sorry. And what's your relationship to student housing? How did you deserve your place in this panel?
I've been involved in international student education and student housing since about 2000.
Okay.
I first worked for a study abroad organization out of the States called IES.
Okay.
And they were building a student dorm in central London. And previous to working for them, I used to work for Hyatt Hotels.
Okay.
So they asked me to come to the UK and help them set up their student dormitory
Okay.
there. And then from there, worked with Nido Student Living, helped set up that brand in 2006.
So you're based in Europe?
I am, yes.
Go back every once in a while?
No, not
Too
much
little.
anymore, no.
You don't need to. You love Europe too much.
I do.
Okay, good.
I do.
Welcome. I would like to ask Hauke Brede to come forward. Hauke, where are you? There's Hauke. Hauke is member of the executive committee of the Allianz
Almost.
Real Estate Chief Risk Officer. You're protecting the company against
At least I'm
the
trying.
wrong decisions.
At least I'm trying to,
Okay.
yes, on a daily basis.
And you still like student housing, even if you're a risk officer?
Trying to get into that topic,
Okay.
absolutely, yeah.
All right. Your company does a lot of student housing right
No,
now?
I really have to say, I mean, it's really where I would say we are looking into it.
We're learning today.
Exactly, so it's more a learning exercise for me, trying to understand not just risk, but return and risk.
Okay, thank you. Welcome. Sean O'Shea. Where is Sean? Sean? Hey, there you are. Sean and I agreed that the picture is probably 20 years old. That's why I was confused. Sean, you had the good years, right?
Yes.
Okay. Sean, what's your relationship to student housing?
Well, I started with my management team, UPP, 10 years ago.
Okay.
We're a student operator in the UK.
Okay.
We
How
have
big?
30,000 rooms now.
So, 30,000 rooms. Important business in the UK?
Oh, very important. It's
Okay.
absolutely core to the HE sector.
All right. Welcome. Thank you. And last, Tim Mitchell. Where's Tim? There's Tim. Welcome, Tim. Is there still a place for you somewhere? Yes, there is, over there.
Go around that way.
Okay. Join us at the table. You're a CEO?
We're standing now, are we?
Yes. You can also sit. And what's your relationship to student housing?
Well, I suppose I started in the student market in the late 1990s
Okay.
and joined what was then a very small Bristol, Southwest England-based business, which became Unite Group PLC.
Okay.
And so, late 1990s, I started doing some work with Nick Porter, who set up that business. And so, yeah, I worked at Unite for about 8.5, 9 years,
Okay.
and done some stuff since then. So
All right. Welcome.
I'm an early joiner.
We agreed that all of you are going to, except for you, going to have a short presentation. And the operative word is short. And Maureen, you are going to start.
Can I get the
Of course you can.
Okay. There's been a lot of development going on in the last year or so, and what I'd like to do is just highlight some projects that have some unique interests to them, reflect some local culture and interests. Example here, South Africa, they are using disused grain silos and shipping containers as a solution to a student housing shortage that they have there. A lot of the activity that we're seeing is coming out of Holland. 2011, they had their action plan of developing 16,000 more student beds by 2016. So how are they doing? 8,100 beds completed so far, 4,300 under construction, and another 4,400 with planning.
Where is this? Sorry again.
This is in Holland.
This is Holland. Okay.
Yes,
Yep.
this is in Holland.
Okay.
As a few examples of what's been going on, the Islandstede project is actually the largest campus in the Netherlands with 3,400 students. And what they've experimented with this project here is modular building. This project took only 8 months to develop, and it looks exactly like the others within the campus, so there's very little differentiation between the build there. But this is one example of how they're trying to shorten the process to get more accommodation built sooner rather than later. Also, yesterday on our tour, we went to see Ravel Residence, and Amstel House is part of the student experience. Interesting about these is that they have roof gardens, basketball courts, space for city farming, employment agency on site, medical centers. But these were actually built as temporary structures. They have 12-year leases on their land, so they're hoping to get a renovation on that lease. If not, we're going to have a dismantle party at some point in the future. Student Hotel, very funky brand that has some really creative communal spaces for the students, opened up 2 new locations this year. Campus Demon Zood, almost 1,000 beds there. They claim that this is the first model to be developed according to the American campus model. They have a lot of amenities on their ground floor, really trying to emulate the American style.
I know this one very well. This is the one that is redeveloped. It's an it's an old office complex.
It is 5
of
different
which we have
complexes
too much
that
in
were-
this country, and that's
Exactly,
okay.
and it's a creative use
All right,
of,
very
what
nice.
was. Moving into Austria, the Austrians have been very active in the green and passive technologies, and here we have 2 examples. The greenhouse in Vienna, passive green, it's made out of wood construction. It's also their first Energy Plus residence there, meaning they'll be generating energy from it. And another one is Icon Vienna, 82 beds that are actually former shipping containers, and they're
Right.
using photovoltaics on that site. And again, Energy Plus. Milestone in Vienna, photovoltaics on the roof. They have a roof garden, automatic electric shutoffs. They anticipate that 5 to 10% of their solar demand is going to be generated by the solar power that they're generating. They also recover energy via their elevators, which is very cool. And then Stuo has been around for about 20 years. 2 new locations. There they have terraces, saunas, fitness centers, e-bike charging centers, steam baths. Very cool.
We're spoiling the bread, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's very local treatment to have, steam baths and music rooms and things
Okay.
like that. So well done for them.
Yeah.
New brand in Germany called Fizz. They have 8 new locations. They've only been around since 2012, but 2 fun concepts with them is Fizz to Go, which is their carry-out for late-night snacks and essentials, and their Fizz Plus, which is their high-end product, so larger rooms, balconies, roof terraces, concierge services. Student & Work, which has been around for a long time. This is actually the largest passive home in Germany with 533 beds. It's also, they come unfurnished, and it's built according to low housing.
What's a passive home?
Passive home means that you can regulate the temperatures from the outside to the inside, and they
Okay.
actually breathe. And they're much
Okay.
more environmentally friendly.
Energy efficient.
Exactly. And for some fun ones,
Yeah. This was
Cubity.
already a lot of fun.
Cubity, I think, is quite fun. Here is a pod where 12 students will live. Green, again,
Okay.
Energy Plus. Communal spaces in there. They have a common area called the Marketplace, common cooking areas, terraces. Not sure how many of these will actually be built, but it's a rather unique design built in connection with the TUD students.
So I'm sure 7.2 square meters per room.
Per pod that they live in. So you've
Okay.
got 7.2, 7.2,
Okay.
12 of those students, and then there's a box built around it,
Okay.
which I think is kind of cool.
Yes.
Denmark is looking for some solutions on the canals. They're hoping to have 890 beds by 2016. But the project has yet to receive final approval, but I think that's an interesting take on what they can do with the existing. And University of Lund students, in conjunction with Tegbaum, have designed what they call 10 smart square meters. And these kind of look like mobile homes.
Okay.
But there's actually 22 of these that are to be in use right now. Kitchen, sleeping loft, bathroom, and garden patio, which is rather cool.
Are they individually placed, or are they connected? It's just
They're in an environment together.
okay.
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah. And last but not least, we're asking, what do the millennial students actually want? 116 students from Switzerland coordinated to put together this little video for us. If I can get some help with the video. Just to show us how important sliding shutters are. Thank you.
As a father, these kinds of pictures worry me. I mean, do they still have time to study? Okay, thank you. What's the main lesson here? Are you telling us that there is some very interesting developments, that it gets out of the very standard solutions?
Yeah, I think the thing to keep in mind is that each country within Europe is still very individual, and I think there is some very interesting aspects that can be contributed from those cultures and environments. And I don't think taking a cookie-cutter approach from one country and just sticking it in another is a solution. I mean, yes, there's definitely a shortage of beds, but I think there's still creativity to be had.
Okay, thank you. Hauke, you had also a short presentation?
Yeah, very short and really more big picture to really talk about. I mean, Allianz as a potential institutional investor and why we do what we do. So just a few slides on that one. This is basically showing the investment cycle. So, I mean, this is not our own money that we invest, and that's the reason why I think we have to be very careful about what is the risk and the return. Ultimately, what is the return on risk-adjusted capital of that money that we invest. And really the money comes from our policyholders. I mean, people like you investing in life insurance products or health insurance, etc. And we use that money, this cash, to invest in different asset classes. Yeah? So the majority of what we invest in are bonds, unfortunately, because right now we live in a low interest rate environment. But we also invest in equity. We also invest in so-called alternatives, which is infrastructure and real estate. So I'm in charge of this, the real estate world, and there I'm looking at risk and return profiles. Just to give you some numbers, I mean, Allianz overall assets under management are around 500 billion, of which only 5% represents real estate. Yeah, so only 5% equates to 25 billion euros in real estate. The majority is more, I mean, in Europe. And so the question is, I mean, in what shape or form does student housing actually fit into this portfolio? And so that is something I would like to also elaborate today. And that's actually how, I mean, Allianz is organizing this, probably similar to other insurance company and pension funds. In terms of why real estate, I mean, and I would like to talk about this briefly because it gives you also some guidance of why student housing might actually be relevant for us as an institutional investor. Real estate, I mean, has, I mean, a very positive risk-return profile vis-a-vis bonds. Yeah? I mean, right now, I mean, the spread between an investment and a bond, let's say a German bond at 1.1, 1.2% versus investing in real estate, where you can maybe easily find a 5% coupon. I mean, that's very attractive currently. So I think that actually is a good call for action to go that route.
You already have housing in your mix, in your real estate?
Student housing, well, in a very indirect shape and form. This question today about, I mean, is multifamily not actually the same as student housing, or should that actually be not a subsegment? We are invested in multifamily in the US.
Okay.
That's actually one investment in Boston. And when you see, I mean, what are the prices paid there per apartment, paid by foreign students, I mean, we're not talking about 2,000, we're talking about 3,000 and more euros, or actually dollars in this case. Yeah, so it was intended to be a multifamily investment, but basically what we find in Boston, I mean, it's very close to MIT and Harvard, and the students are paying this price tag. So indirectly, I would argue, yes, we already invested in student housing, but I believe it has a very unique characteristic if you really invest in a pure, I mean, student housing accommodation. But I mean, other things, I mean, it's low correlation. I think that's also very good. I think it's a good diversifier. because not just real estate, but between real estate and other asset classes, let's say bonds, etc. But I think within real estate, I think you find good diversification mechanisms. So maybe student housing might actually help us to further increase diversification. Again, you have also something that is very unique in real estate. You can have really this so-called alpha through active asset management. And I think yesterday we saw some examples during the site visit how you can really generate value. You can't do this actually when you own a bond. Yeah, and I think here this is, again, maybe a reason why student housing might.
So why can you create value?
Well, I mean, through active asset management with your, with the tenants, or actually the way you operate.
By lowering your turnover, by
exactly providing more service and you charge for it, or actually by having, let's say, cheaper construction cost at the very beginning, using modular.
And this is, of course, an asset that specifically has the opportunity to have the other income
Absolutely,
sources.
absolutely. Okay. Yeah, so you need to be smart about it.
And it doesn't make you nervous as a risk officer?
Well, it does, because nervous in the sense you have to understand it. And I think that's really, what we need to do in order to jump into that. We need to understand, how this works, but not just on a micro level, but also, on an investment level, is there enough liquidity? What is the exit strategy, etc.
Which is also important to have a good manager.
That's very important, especially for asset class, and we'll come to this in a second. There are some core, real estate asset classes, let's say like office or residential or even retail. We would like to do it on our own, but there are some others. Let's say logistics. We wouldn't do it on our own. We just rely on a strong partner. Liability matching is a very important one, and I had this discussion in the break. If you find a student house with a very long lease, let's say 20, 30 years, so we are as an investor not the operator, but we're just leasing out, let's say, like a building. That's very attractive because on the liability side, promising to our life insurance customers that they will get a return in 30 years from now. I would love to see a rental contract that actually has the same maturity profile. Yeah, and so that's a good.
So your added additional income, which you liked, is for you offset with an agreement on a very, that would be.
That was your earlier question, right?
Yeah.
So I think, within a portfolio, I think you need to understand, there are certain riskier and less risky, parts of your equation. And so if you have a long-term lease contract, you could actually then argue that having a lower risk profile, you could also, justify a lower return profile. That's a little bit the point.
All right. And are there parties that do these rental contracts, long-term rental contracts? Is that the university? Is that a manager? What kind of parties are there to give you a long-term rental agreement?
Well, operators, for example, that is the typical approach.
Okay.
I think that's actually the majority. Right. Yeah. And last but not least, inflation hedging is a little bit a moot point nowadays because people are talking about deflation. So that's actually a different animal, dangerous animal from a real estate perspective. But if there is inflation, of course, you want to own real estate as long as it's inflation protected. So again, that actually would be also a very important part of the equation. So last slide, just to show what we do. We invest direct in let's say, for example, in core markets, a typical office product. Also indirectly, as I mentioned before, logistics, for example, or probably student accommodation would be through funds. And we also provide lending, but also there I could see a point if somebody actually wants to, buy a student house and wants to look for funding, then Allianz would also be, if the loan-to-value ratio, for example, would be quite conservative, then that would be quite attractive to us.
Do you have a preference if talking about student housing?
Well, direct, I think, will not work.
No.
I think for us, that is, in terms of liquidity, in terms of expertise, in terms of exit risk, I rather would like to actually go the indirect route.
Okay.
But I think I would be open to the lending equation as well. Okay. Yeah, so if somebody wants to invest, let's say APG, they have enough money on their own, but...
no, they're not going to lend. No.
Well, we would lend, right?
Okay.
They would have to okay. So that's about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Sean, you didn't have a presentation, but at least can you explain us a little bit how you approach the student housing market?
Well, our business model is focused solely on forming partnerships. with universities, and that's typically for a duration, for example, of either 50 years or our example at the University of Reading where we have a 125-year partnership. So the capability of the UPP group is to actually go out, procure the funding, carry out the planning, procure the construction, and once the actual asset is finished, to actually operate it in partnership with the university.
How, would you call yourself a developer?
Primarily, we're an operator. Because,
Okay.
I mean, the most important, the actual construction part is the easy bit.
Okay.
Actually creating the asset is the easy bit, is actually operating it.
Okay.
That's absolutely key.
all right. Okay.
So
And you can provide for him the comfort level that.
we have a £5 billion public bond programme, so I think
Okay.
the answer is yes.
He can buy the
sort
bond.
of-
He can buy the
yeah,
bond. Good.
Yeah, and at the moment we've invested about 1.8 billion.
How much return would he get on the bond?
The yields are very, very similar to what you quoted, actually.
Just give me a number.
We should look at an overall IRR of between 9 and 10%.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
During lunchtime.
I mean,
lunchtime.
so
I'll have 5%
what
down
we
on it.
do is we marry ourselves to the higher education
Okay.
institution. So you're actually buying into that institution and the success of that institution.
What's your volume
We're on campus
Yeah.
or very close to campus.
What's your volume on a yearly basis?
Our turnover is just over 121 million.
Okay.
And EBITDA is
And that's
62 million.
purely management.
That's purely rents.
Yes, okay,
That's purely
pure
rents.
rents,
Yeah.
okay.
So obviously there's development finance.
Okay.
We build between 3,000 and 4,000 rooms a year.
Okay. Any interest outside UK?
Very much so. I mean,
Good.
I have to be honest. In the UK, there's still a very strong pipeline of opportunities. We know of circa another 20,000 beds that are coming to the market, but we do have Dutch investors.
Okay.
And we're very grateful for that.
Okay.
We are looking.
That's our pension money again. Yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
Okay.
yeah.
Good.
We are looking to actually. We have a series of strategy meetings in the new year to actually look at the prospect of taking our partnership model
Yeah.
into mainland Europe.
Okay. Okay. And any countries that you say those are the ones that are most. You did your homework. I would.
Yeah,
think,
we've done our homework.
Yeah.
Like, so obviously, my name's O'Shea, so that's got an Irish.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Okay, that's
I'd
the
be
first
very
thing.
interesting to go over to Ireland. We would like to go to come here,
Yeah.
but as was mentioned in the earlier session, there's structural difficulties
Yes.
in terms of the
Are
rent
there
cap.
hotspots? Are there areas where you think those are the areas that if you are in this business, that's where you at least should be? The big cities?
Yes.
Or the second-tier cities or the third-tier cities?
Ideally, what we'd like to do is go with a partner.
Yep.
It could even be a UK university.
Okay.
To actually who's coming out
All right.
into Europe, someone that we know and love.
Yeah.
But location is absolutely fundamental.
So what about that location? University?
The quality of the institution
Yeah.
is absolutely fundamental. What is the demand demographics in terms of the student-to-bed ratio?
Yeah.
What is the university strategy? Because students are looking for employability at the end of the day. And how could we actually make it work? How can you address the concerns of students in terms of affordability, facilities, and the community environment they need?
And all those funky ideas that was in Maureen's presentation, is that something that you relate to? Or
Totally.
Yeah?
I was totally
Yeah.
on board with all of that. At Nottingham-Trent University, we've just completed a scheme of 900 bedrooms. Associated with that is 2,100 person nightclub,
Okay.
3 gyms, breakout areas, study areas, relaxation areas.
Okay.
That is the future.
Farming,
Farming, yeah.
which in Amsterdam, mostly most likely illegal substances
we haven't
in farming.
started farming yet.
We're getting the model complete right now. Yes, yes. Okay, thank you. We'll join in discussion. Tim Mitchell,
Go.
you also had a small
Talking about
presentation.
agricultural.
Yes, yes.
So
Go.
Go. Okay. So I just want to spend a very short period of time just saying really where we've come from and where we're going. And that all gets us into a conversation about some of the things we're doing on an international scale with the sector. So, as I said earlier on, we've been on a sort of trajectory as a business since the early 1990s. Nick Porter, our chairman, set up in the early 1990s, started doing student accommodation on quite a small scale in the southwest of England. That became Unite Group PLC, absolutely cracking business in the UK. A number of people in this room, including myself, helped support and build that business. And it's a really great business run by a superb management team, 50,000 beds or so. The last 6 years for us has been establishing Urban Nest. And Urban Nest is operating in London and Australia, the sort of 4 biggest markets in Australia: Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide. And really what led us into that journey was, as we were developing in the UK, was a growing understanding of the international student customer, the migration of students around the world. Currently, somewhere around 3.5 million students, as we all know, leave their country of origin and go like birds to destinations around the world. And that's going to grow to well over 7 million in our sort of business lifetime. And that's created an enormously interesting and dynamic opportunity for us all. So the last 6 years has been Urban Nest in partnership with our capital partners, Evergreen, and our own capital, very successful business in London, Australia. I think for us now, the next 10 years, the next leg of the journey is going to be Europe, for which I'm responsible. And so we're going into Europe via Dublin. So we're going the wrong way first and then heading back this way. So mainland Europe for us is 2015 onwards.
Any specific places?
People keep asking me that, actually.
Yeah.
And the straight answer is I don't know.
Okay.
But where we are right now is
You really don't know? You know what
I don't. I know a little.
I see.
Yeah, you either know something or nothing, don't you?
Yes, right.
But where we are with Europe right now is Dublin. So we've got a programme to do somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500 bed spaces in Dublin.
Okay.
Come back to that in a minute. I'm sure Bob Crompton and Knightsbridge's team have something to say about Dublin as well. I think our intention in mainland Europe is to probably, within the sort of next business plan period, to do and invest in somewhere around 5,000 beds. In terms of the where, I think what we've learned, certainly in our last 6-year journey with Urban Nest, it's better to focus on a limited number of markets. And if we did Australia again, I think we would say we would just focused on Sydney and Melbourne and not do Adelaide.
The big
Brisbane.
ones, the really big ones.
So, and really where that is, and I think, you get a sense of this in Amsterdam and certain markets around the world, this sort of global knowledge economy and the sort of the magnet effect of some of these big markets is what we're really interested in.
So criteria-wise, big cities?
I think not necessarily
Or
big
the
cities. I mean,
university?
if you go, sublime to ridiculous, I suppose. That's you take Dublin as an example. There's about 80,000 full-time students in Dublin, and if you look at the city centre market, probably 45,000 students. So it's not a big market in its own right. But what you've got in Ireland is that in Dublin, that capital city feel. You've got loads of government, both local and central government support to higher education. You've got a very vibrant language school community. And you've got this growing other phenomenon, which we all see out there, which is this sort of feeder college.
Okay.
And you compare that to Tokyo, which is where we're currently got our first deal. We're working on in Tokyo with the Asia team. Tokyo's got 1.3 million higher education students. Okay. Which is playing London at 350 to 500, depending on how you calculate it. And so it just gives you a demonstration. We're not necessarily focused on scale. We're focused on that sort of knowledge economy vibrancy bit.
So the Dublin characteristics are the ones that you're also going to use to pick your sites in Europe?
I think you go back to this thing about if I was going to say where we would be in 5 years' time, the answer would be somewhere. We'd know by then. But I think we would have been involved in developing a limited number of markets in Europe, but done it really well. And so looking at the London team example, Anthony Mellior, who works now in the Urban Nest London business, the example there is a team which is totally focused on that market. And all they do every day is work in London with university relationships, working on their estate in London, and that's the key to success.
Okay.
I'm going to skip over this. We've all seen this before, so
Yeah. No.
yeah. So global opportunity. I think the global opportunity, apart from absolute numbers. So there's this graph. Everybody's got a similar graph in their business plan. What that really gives us is the sort of components of our business, which is culturally led opportunity and culturally-led business, which leads you into the type of accommodation we're involved in. And what we obviously know and see is radically increasing student numbers, but also from some new source markets.
So,
And,
that's the purple line, for instance, East and the
Yeah, so
Far
you know,
East.
the growth in Asia, the growth in middle-class wealth in India. So India is exploding as a higher education marketplace. We already know about China. You know, 32 million higher education students in China, and there's 22 million people in Australia. So huge scale. But that for us is not just the absolute number opportunity as a business, but it's about saying, well, if we can understand the cultural differences and the requirements of those customer groups, we can do our job even better. So we're spending a lot of time looking at that. And you know, the other thing is this, as I mentioned before, this opportunity in our world is there's a combination of the feeder colleges, people like Kaplan, INTI, private university organisations, you know, Laureate, I think, who educate 800,000 students globally, something like that. I think Kaplan have got 320 sites globally now. People were mentioning satellite campuses. So, you know, the other place we're on site right now in Dubai, I think in the UAE there's 32 or 35 satellite campuses, organisations. You've got Wollongong University, Canadian University, American University in Dubai, just a few examples. You've got Sussex University in Kuala Lumpur. So a really dynamic marketplace. And again, we're trying to fit ourselves alongside that. New York University, funnily enough, we've got students from New York University living with us in Australia, in London. We're talking about Dubai, and you know, it just shows up some of the benefits of joining those dots. I just want to just finish with this slide. Just gives us sort of a snapshot of what we're up to right now. I've touched on most of this already, but just talking about the sort of nature of the accommodation and also linking it back probably to some of the stuff that was discussed earlier on. But you know, look at the London market. We've got a little over 3,000 beds operational, built, and probably a similar number in the pipeline. What we've done in London, and this heart of this affordability debate, we set our stall out just to focus on central London, so London Zone 1, Fringe Zone 1, and to create locations which are really identifiable from the international student perspective. So, you know, King's Cross next to St Pancras Station, by Tower Bridge, Hoxton, Camden, those sorts of locations.
And you have to pay for those locations.
You have to pay for those locations, and I say unashamedly, we know that we're purpose-built, purpose-managed, providing high-quality accommodation with lots of services. And we are in the upper quartile of the affordability. But the thing I'll point out in London, what we've done to increase affordability is actually broaden the range of product and price point in our estate. So we've been pioneering new room types, some non-en-suite, triples, so three people sharing a space with their own bedroom, sharing shower room facilities. We're doing twin rooms in London, we're doing twin rooms in Dubai. We've done some
Who are your customers in London?
So I think I'm right in saying it's something like 83% or well over 80% of our customers are international students in central London. Yeah. But in driving that range of product and price point, we've been able to drive the entry price down. So the entry price in London for our estate is late hundreds in terms of rents, all the way up to standard ensuite room at about 260, 270 a week, through to studios much higher than that. And that's why I'm interested in this debate about, if I looked into early look into Europe, is that some of the room types are not being driven by custom requirements and preferences. They're being driven by taxation or regulation.
Regulations.
So if you look here, the standard big studio room living unit is not necessarily what students would necessarily want. Okay. It's what they can get a grant on. And that for us is quite interesting.
Does it scare you to move outside?
Well, I think it's a bit like France as well, I suppose. With you've got a lot of studio product being created in France for sale to private pension fund investors who get a break on it and buy it at 4% yield. So it does scare us, I suppose, in terms of that gives you it's like an artificially financially led or legislative led product rather than a customer research led product.
How do you get your funding?
So in terms of our business?
Yes.
Yeah, so if you look at our business in terms of funding, we've got our own capital, so we always co-invest in what we do.
Okay.
If you look
at the developer, manager?
So we develop, manage, and operate long term, yeah, absolutely spot on. So I think I've pretty well covered this now, so I'll stop.
You have no more slides?
I've got loads more slides.
I like your slides.
Yeah,
they're good slides.
Yeah, they're fun. I could talk for hours. I mean, Middle East, Dubai, where we're currently
we won't do that.
one more.
One more, okay.
But Dubai is interesting, just this thing about cultural differences. One of the things we have to learn going to every new market is very different in every market. And, Dubai, you've got lots of issues around things like segregation and which you've got to really respect. So that means our response to that is coming up with clever buildings where you can segregate, you've got extra layers of security, and all those sort of things, separate prayer rooms, all that sort of stuff.
Does branding play a role with you? For instance, if you can position a brand in various countries, would that assist you in getting your customers?
That's a long conversation. I'm not a branding expert, but
Well, that's
I
the
do have-
opening of the conversation with the rest.
It just see what people think. My limited sense of branding is that, you know, if you say look at our Urban Nest brand, our Union Nest brand, which is the brand we're using in Europe, that's quite a corporate sort of facing, and it joins up the dots, particularly if you're facing towards universities, probably from a parent's point of view. What I do know is that students are very disinterested in branded buildings.
Okay.
So they'll say, I want to live at Urban Nest.
Location.
I want to live in Sydney, whatever street, you know. So
The wheat farm,
the wheat farm.
yeah, in Amsterdam. That makes a
I'm
difference.
I'm very keen veg gardener, by the way. But that's not
Okay. All right. So I think we have a general idea of a couple of the main players in the student housing at this moment. Is there a major change going on? Just to go back for you for a second, you have a longer history in student housing. Do you see major changes over the last 10 years that really caught your attention? Or is it
Wow.
just growing steadily up to the levels that we're currently in?
Well, I think, you know, in almost every segment of the conversation, you can say there's been massive change. So, you know, if you say the asset class as a whole, we all started out, a lot of people in the room, you know, started out in the 1990s, a similar time. You know, the asset class just didn't exist. There were very few players. It was very difficult bank funding. You had to get university agreements guaranteed to get bank finance. And look at the situation now in Western Europe. You know, the under asset class is universally understood. You know, major pension fund players are in that space where they weren't there even 5-6 years ago. So evolution of asset class,
Okay.
the maturity of it, evolution of product, massive evolution, and evolution of service.
Is it your idea too? This rapid development, evolution over the last 4 or 5 years?
I've seen the quality change.
Yeah.
I think originally the stock was pretty bulk standard.
Yep.
Not a lot of amenities, and I think as new players have come on board providing different, I think more and more players are having to keep up with the Joneses.
Yeah.
Yes.
And same for you?
Without doubt. I
Yeah.
mean, I've noticed universities over the last 5 years taking a very, very different approach. And that has involved significant investment in terms of their own assets, in particular the academic estate, but the creation of student experience programs.
Okay.
And we've had to up our game to respond to that. That's in the level of services that are provided, the way in which those services are provided, and the amenity space that now is becoming the norm. Students are now regarded as consumers.
Okay.
It's a competitive world. Universities are now actively competing to secure students. That's
Yes.
very different.
Okay.
The put up and shut
Which
up
helps you a
piece.
lot, of course.
Of course,
Okay.
yeah.
Are they willing to invest, or are they willing to give guarantees to you? Do you have specific relationship with universities?
Yeah, I mean, we have a very structured document, the 50-year agreement.
Okay.
It is a true partnership. We don't ask them to underwrite any revenues whatsoever.
Okay.
If students don't come,
So what do they do then?
they give us the student rents. If students
Okay.
don't come, we get the rent.
Okay.
And we have a partnership board with each of their university partners,
Okay.
and they often take a shareholding in that as well.
Okay.
So it's a fully transparent operational model.
Okay.
So, for me, that works.
Can I say one
Yeah, of
thing?
course.
Well, that sounds great. I would build a lot more housing if I had that kind of deal. And that kind of leads back to the, so this is a very prosperous time. It's going good, and the asset classes are changing. But being a student, the demand is incredibly high still. So do you think you're moving fast enough? Are you actually investing as much as you could in this market? And investing maybe a little bit faster, wouldn't that also maybe secure the asset class a little bit more?
Don't you start on us as well?
Watch out.
I mean, it's a real conundrum, isn't it? I mean, if you look at the UK example, go back 15 years, you know, obviously government support to growth of higher education drove a significant increase in student numbers. Australia, right, you know, Australia's had a similar circumstance over the last few years. Growth in international students, growth in government support to higher education, growth in the school leaver demographic. So it all drives higher education growth. You know, in the UK, the growth in student numbers was matched, you know, thousands and tens of thousands of students. And about £1.50 was put into provision of accommodation. And that's where we came in and filled that vacuum. There's no way that our industry can match the pace of the demand and the growth in demand. And
No worries about saturation of the market?
well, again, I'd be interested to see some operational comments in the room.
Yeah.
And I was having a conversation earlier on with Darren Ellis from Unite, and we were, every year markets reach saturation. We say saturation on equality, some get oversupplied, some get a bit undersupplied, and this has rotated over the last few decades. So, I think you think students have to compete in cities in which they study with all the other people who are competing for residential accommodation. And, what I've seen, certainly, if you again take the example of, whilst you've got demographic decline in the horizon in some parts of Europe and other parts of the world, the background population is growing significantly, and that is forcing students out of accommodation. Okay. So I don't see saturation if you look at it at a big picture, no.
Are there any fears on your side if you look at the asset class?
No, absolutely. I mean, the key question is demand and supply, right? I mean, right now, if there's an undersupply, the question is, how many, investors, developers are jumping on that asset class? Yeah. And then what we've seen in other asset classes, then all of a sudden it happens, and then there's a bubble. Then actually every student has, an accommodation, but
you see
return go down.
Sorry to interrupt you. It's also about that price. Just my imagination. Those numbers. Those high numbers, there has to be a saturation. Not in the product, maybe, but in price, there has to be. How many rich parents are there?
Yeah, absolutely spot on. Again, sorry.
Yeah, but that was one of the slides, that Tim was showing before. In terms of, student enrollment, and I think it's a straight line up. And then there was this dotted line somewhere in between saying financial crisis. Yeah. And there was only, I think, Eastern and Central Europe where you saw a little bit of a decline. Yeah. Yeah, and I would assume at one point that actually will have an impact because, if people don't have a job, parents paying for, their sons and daughters, the question is, will that have a long-term impact on available income? Because as an investor, I am focused on the cash flow generated. Yeah. And I'm trying to understand where the cash flow is coming from, right, and what could actually, potentially be, jeopardizing this cash flow. Yeah? And that might be one topic. On a pure cash flow level, and also on the supply and demand side, if more investors are jumping onto that product, and then after some time you don't have enough demand, and that's also not good news, especially for long-term investors. Our investment horizon is 10 years plus. Okay. Yeah, so I don't want to just make sure that I'm in business for the next 5 years. So it should be more a long-term play.
What minimum requirements are there currently, if you look at all the ideas that you presented or the concepts that you present to us? What is for you vital part of the student accommodation at this time, apart from having a bed to sleep in? You talk about funky, but that's hard to describe or define, especially for an investor. What is the minimum requirement to make a product stable, work? What do you think?
Minimum they would be looking at is their IT provision. Students at times are more interested whether they have IT versus whether they have a bed.
A bed and a Wi-Fi. That's
exactly.
it. That's about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Something very wired like that. Yeah. I think varieties of rooms, like we were speaking about, general spaces to be creative, whatnot. Just not, one central room, but you have, music rooms, you've got art rooms, you've got fashion design rooms, things like that might correspond with the universities that you might be close to, right, that complement those students there. Amenity space, that was one thing that really didn't exist before.
Location-wise?
I think, to be really honest, I don't think students necessarily mind traveling a bit if it's a standard commuting route. If they're commuting no different than somebody who's going to a job, and perhaps they're paying a little bit less to live there in a quality location, I think they would do it.
That's not a defining issue.
I wouldn't think so, no. And I think until we get to a point where there is such critical mass, I think you could build Legoland house and it would fill up. It doesn't necessarily matter at this point.
All right. Okay. Questions from the audience? Don't disappoint me. Is it so clear? This is your chance, sorry.
Then I have one while you guys think about a question. It's again regarding rent. We also had a question before. I don't really think we answered it quite enough, or you guys answered it quite enough. So talking about affordability, again, £260 a week. That is a lot of pounds a month. And that would take, combined with tuition fees, it'll be the double. You'll have to double both tuition fees and your affordability. How are you looking into a market where there are coming more students from different social backgrounds and definitely some students that don't have wealthy parents? Are you looking into buying a bit more affordable housing? It must be possible, even in London.
Yes, and so, to be unashamedly, we're an unashamedly private capitalist sort of organisation, and so we've made a decision to set up our stall in central areas of cities, and we know that, say, we attract or are available to, say, 30 or 40% of the student population with a range of products. So the answer to price is obviously you can do a number of things. You can move further out of town, so you can go into Zone 2, Zone 3 in London, for example, buy your land cheaper. But land is a fairly expensive commodity, whether you're a mile from campus or 10 miles from campus. And then you've got the construction cost. The construction cost you can't shift around much. If you say it's building in mainland Europe, 40,000, 45,000 euro minimum bed, so it's a fixed. So coming back to your question, the thing about affordability, I think, is there are a number of ways that students can access more affordable accommodation. They can live further out. They can live in HIMO, multi-let houses. They can live on campus of the university, so guaranteeing income streams, and they're getting a rent reduction as a result of that. But it's a big question, and so I can't answer that question from the perspective of just our business.
Would it be part of your business?
Well, I'll give you an example. We're building 1,200 rooms for the University of London, and we've looked at the whole academic year. And what we're saying for the students that you can stay in the accommodation during your term time for £180 a week, which is Zone 1, that's highly affordable in London. In the summer, that accommodation becomes a hotel. Mm-hmm. And actually that...
You kick them out?
Yeah, that's sort of it. But that generates £3 or £4 million, which makes the whole model work. Yeah. So in effect, you're in central London location, and you've got affordable rents for students. A lot of our accommodation is on campus, so all our rents are actually pitched at what the university charge. So for me, affordability is a key, and I'd much rather get 100% full than have RPI plus rent increases.
Okay. Did you already waken up? A question over there.
Yeah, Sebastian Ribbentrop, NIDO Student Housing. I studied in East Berlin, and I have to say there is a reason why you pay $50,000 in the United States for education and £9,000 in the UK, because you get the best education. I think Europe, the continent, has to learn that, and they have to start quickly, because it is an important commodity, and probably the most important. I have 3 children, and I'm happily investing every penny into their education, and I'd rather pay $50,000 and have them go to a good school than nothing and have them have no education. I think that's a very important thing to get across here, because it's not that we as student housing providers in London are taking advantage of certain situations. We're providing what students want. They want the community, they want security, they want access to different nations. We have 100 different nations in our buildings. It's fantastic. They're speaking Chinese, Japanese, American, UK English, Australian, everything. And it's something worth paying for. If you don't want to and you'd rather live somewhere else.
It's not a question, I guess,
yes,
of whether it's worth paying for. It is how big a market is it?
Well, let the market find out.
Okay.
Don't dictate it. There are other. UPP is a model for itself. It bases itself on different pricing, offers maybe less amenities than most of the other, or some of the other models in central London, and let the market evolve. Have some people offer a high range, a high price. We offer a very high range and high price, and I'm sure there's a limited market for that, and there's market for other different prices.
Given your view on this, can you ask a question?
Yes. I wanted to understand, because what's very important is, for example, Allianz, that you get that kind of capital into the market. We have been trying, Tim a lot longer, and Sean than I have, trying to get these institutional investors interested in the market, and how we could help you better understand this market so you can start investing your clients' money into the sector.
So the question is, what information do you need to understand the market even better than you do today?
Okay, I think that's a very clear question. And I think the answer is transparency. And that shouldn't be a surprise, because as an institutional investor, we would like to understand, I mean, what is the historical performance, track record, and also prospects. And we've seen it in other asset classes, let's say logistics and light industrial. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting asset class, but if you try to get, I mean, numbers, facts, and figures around that asset class, you have a problem, right? And so I think, I mean, one key point would really be to get, I mean, this kind of information in order to create stickiness for us and to know that this is really a sustainable asset class.
What makes the market intransparent, right? What's the information you're lacking right now?
Well, I mean, it's around, I mean, let's say historical performance, what are different, I mean, we talk about student accommodation, but I mean, there's so many sub-segments, I mean, and it varies country by country. It's not one size fits all. I mean, you said it before, right? I mean, it's not copy-paste. I mean, so you really need to understand if, I mean, one of the issues is we invest on a yearly basis roughly 2 billion euros in real estate.
Yes.
Yeah, so I can't actually buy, I mean, one student house after the other, because that actually is, I mean, it doesn't work. So we really need to have critical mass. Yeah, and therefore it would be probably a portfolio of student houses. And so the question is, what kind of information do you need in order to understand the return profile and the risk profile of these different investments? And it's not just then a UK fund probably, but it's a European fund maybe, or maybe even a global fund. But again, then you really need to have the transparency market by market to fully understand what is driving it. Is it local regulation, for example? Is it maybe, I mean, the way the students are have to pay tuition fee or not? Yeah, I mean, you could make the argument that in Germany, this is great, by the way. In Germany, you have to pay for universities through taxes. I mean, I have 3 kids, and I pay for my kids' education already now by having a quite high tax rate. But I think really the point is you need to understand maybe there is a market where there's little or low, I mean, tuition fee, but maybe they can pay more for housing. Or it's just the opposite. People in Germany believe, I mean, it's always free of charge, so they don't even want to pay for housing. Yeah, so what is it? Yeah, and so I think this kind of transparency is what is required. Yeah.
Okay, clear.
Do you think there is enough transparency in the student housing market? I'd like to compare it to the hospitality market. So from a student point of view, it seemed to me that everybody is focusing now on the high end. And from an investor's point of view, I understand, because you want to have a high return on your investment. But also from a risk profile, I can imagine that you're not only want to invest in 5-star student housing, but also in 4-star or 3-star. And my question is there enough variety in the supply?
Is there enough variety in the supply?
Well, I mean, the key question is the location and the quality of the location. And basically, we have 30,000 rooms. Some of those are in provincial cities in the UK.
Do you have various classifications?
There are various classifications, but there's also the price is much lower.
Okay.
In terms of the market price is much lower. So there's 2 factors to this.
Yeah.
The first factor is what is the market price, and then what is the product that we're offering. And there are affordable accommodation solutions that we have developed. I mean, Tim touched on sharing facilities. In terms of bathrooms, it's a classic, slightly smaller rooms. There are those, and we have those.
And is the market transparent enough?
For me, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
because you know it. You know where to find it.
Yeah, I know where to find it. We have good partners. We have good investors. So I'm very happy with it.
I don't
You're
think
looking
so.
like you.
Yeah, I think
right,
there could be a lot more differentiation. I mean, I was thinking about that just the other day, about the star system that you have in hotels.
Yeah.
And I think eventually, once there is much more volume, I think something like a star system that each of the accommodation needs to, does it have this? Does it have, a light switch by the bed? Does it have a night table? you can talk about all you want on the website, and it sounds fantastic, but when you actually get there, it's a completely different story. But I think somebody else needs to be looking at it.
I hope you disagree.
I do, because I think that is, putting those things at marginal costs. And say, if you fit out a student bedroom, it may cost £3,000, it may cost £5,000. If you amortise that over the life of the concession, it makes an absolute negligible difference.
So what's your driving?
It's the land price.
The land,
is
okay.
the key. So
Okay.
you pay a lot more for land in London than you would in Nottingham.
And that makes up half of the price?
In some instances, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That much.
But that actually would be the kind of information I would like to see as an investor. I mean, what is your cost per unit? Yeah, I mean, and then benchmark it against, let's say different market segments.
Yeah.
High end, middle range, low end. We've seen different version yesterday. Yeah, is it cheaper to convert an office building into a student house, or is it, better to use modular, elements to build it up? Yeah. Also to understand what are the life cycle cost of such an investment. Not just, to build it, but also what are the maintenance and repair costs. And so this is the kind of information where I really would like to have it a little bit deeper in order to be then an investor.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Questions? Maybe it's good for you to say, I forgot that, who you are. Maybe why you're here.
Matthew Knott from Study Travel magazine. We're a magazine focused on study abroad, international students. So I have a question for Tim, actually. You mentioned that Urban Nest in London is over 80% international student occupancy. Is that something that you anticipate replicating in the new locations in Tokyo, in China, in the Middle East? Is study abroad a big factor in choosing those locations for you?
Well, I think there's a straight answer, which is yes, you would expect the international student cohort to be the significant majority in all those centres, particularly if you're in the centre of town, where it is more expensive, no doubt about it. But I don't want to overemphasise the fact that we also house thousands of domestic students as well in all the markets we're operating in, and they're equally important, I suppose. But yeah, absolutely, I think if you look at where we're poising our business is very much on that international student travel opportunity. And so I would absolutely expect, in Sydney, I think the percentage of internationals in the estate is somewhere around 65, 68%, so it's lower there, a lot more domestic students. Obviously, in Australia, a lot of students, you think they live in Australia, they live a 5-hour flight away, so they are almost international in their own country. So, yeah. Keep it short.
Did he answer your question? Yes. Okay, good. Anybody else?
Thank you. My name is Kerem. I'm coming from Turkey, and we are running about 4,000 beds, and the student affordability
Are you a
is much more
developer or
different.
are you operator?
We invest, operate, and
Okay.
develop and operate. And when I hear the numbers in San Francisco and in Vienna, and it's actually music to my ears, because the purchasing power in Turkey for students is about $250 a month, and they pay for 10 months. So we had to rethink the situation, and most of our energy right now is going through solving the inherent conflict of interest between the investor and the student. And the idea that we came up with is actually to...
What is the inherent conflict between the
Well, we
investment
want them to pay more money, and they don't have it.
Okay. That's not specific. That's not specific for the student housing industry.
Definitely not. Well, so the idea is that we want to increase their purchasing power. So we started developing a lot of programs with corporations, and we put a lot of effort in giving them opportunities of employment. So we're trying to beat the system by not trying to increase the efficiency of the mathematics, but rather increasing the pie itself.
Does it also mean that you can only deliver bare bones accommodation?
Yes, of course.
No funky places like we just.
Well, we
did.
do have some funky places, but Turkey is not that funky. I mean, it's not Amsterdam. We cannot grow weed on the roof. But, so I was just wondering, actually, whether any effort is being put in Europe as well to increase the employment or increase the purchasing power for students. And is it a responsibility for the student housing investors?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's really important that students, in between the 4, 5, 6 years that they are at the university, they have employment. But we've got to remember that being a full-time student is a full-time job. Otherwise, it's a waste of money. If they don't spend enough time on homework, on going to their lectures and getting enough out of it. So I think it's a balance about creating purchasing power. You don't want to end up with a student working 30, 40 hours a week, because when is that person going to have the time to go to school? So you need to get a balance in that. And that kind of goes back to students purchasing in general, because we are quite big spenders already, either from, again, where did the money come from? Either from a job on the side, part-time jobs, from parents, from debt nets. So I think it's about creating a balance between how much purchasing power do we want out of students that are having a full-time job they're not really getting paid for. So it's a good thing to kind of drag it in and take it on as a thing, but not too much.
Can you afford that in Turkey? Can you afford it? I mean, is it a necessity
Is the necessity
to have for students to combine work and study?
They have to, I think, because I think one of the responsibility for the children is not purely academic.
Okay.
The other idea is to have a lead start when they graduate, and having a work experience under their belt certainly contributes to that. So yes, there should be a time limit, but by no means it should be an experience limit.
Clear? Questions? More?
Hi, my name is Bob Kanter from the Netherlands, and we're talking
What
about.
do you do?
I'm a consultant, development consultant. One of my clients is Casa 400 as well. The next European housing model, does it exist? The European housing model? Because what I see is a difference between local student housing and more luxurious international student housing. So there are different kinds of student housing. So we're talking about the next European student model, housing model. Is there one model, or are there several models?
Yes.
Well, for me, when I first started creating a partnership model about 10 years ago, that has grown substantially now. I think we're in the same position to have a European model based on that similar thing. And I think in the next couple of years, that all those thoughts are going to crystallise. Everyone's very keen to make this happen. It is going to happen.
Yep.
So I think...
And it will adjust itself to every region that you're active in.
Exactly right.
Yes, and that will have different classifications.
Exactly.
You had a question.
Hey, can I comment on that?
Yes,
Actually,
go
I
ahead.
would slightly disagree, sorry,
Okay.
but just I would slightly disagree. I mean, I think Europe is so different. I mean, country by country, regulation is so different. I mean, I agree that there's a common denominator, yeah, probably in student demand, or actually what the parents are willing to pay for, yeah. But I think, I mean, that's where I would slightly disagree whether there will be one model or a couple of models. And then actually as an investor, I would like to see which one is the most, advanced or more profitable one in terms of risk-return profile. So that would be my 50 cents, just outside in, yeah? Once again, I'm not the expert, but that's actually a little bit my observation. I see different...
Would it be helpful? I mean, we have something called Europe, and they love regulations in Europe. So would it help to make investment more easier, accessible for you if there would be some sort of a general agreement on that? For instance, on the discussion we had on affordability, most of that is about the fact that housing is directly subsidized in specific countries, while maybe a better model would be to subsidize the student and not the house.
Absolutely.
Because then you have comparable...
I mean, I strongly believe in competition, and I think if the government believes they can really, regulate things to a way where they already know what the next generation wants, I don't think so. I mean, it doesn't work. It didn't work in the eastern part of Europe many decades ago. So I really strongly believe in this market force, and then actually let the customer decide whether, I mean, and it's not even to have a rating system, 5-star, 4-star, but I mean, check your Facebook account whether this is now the hip location to be, right? But I think then the user should actually, I mean, vote with their feet, and if this is actually more dominant, that model in that market, then that should be the winning horse.
And my question is really, we've heard from two of what I would call mass developers and providers of student accommodation, some price numbers. I didn't hear any for the funky alternatives. Is that running way higher than the other models? Comparable? Less?
No, I would say it's, like the example was the student hotel here that we saw. I think just some of the interior design that looks rather industrial, funky mismatched chairs, things like that. It doesn't come at a premium.
But the pod solutions and some of the green solutions that you showed us.
So part of the answer was just given that am I correct that the differences aren't that big? It's about land values that makes the difference. It's not the accommodation itself. You can make it as funky as you want to. It doesn't make too much difference in price. It's the location that determines the price. Am I?
Yeah.
I'm learning fast. Yeah.
But, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, on the pods that I showed you, those were, the Cubity, that was a prototype, but that was actually built with a chipboard style wall construction inside, which had a passive development, but the energy, the heat, and air temperature was all controlled within that. So, I mean.
Question over there.
Yes, so I'm Vivian Selden from FMEL, Lausanne, Switzerland. We are from the student housing office there. I have a what-if question. Now that, imagine in the next 10 years, all the key players of student housing are coming together, and maybe in the next 10 years, a lot of problems of the demand will be solved. What if we think 10 years back, everything we do on our mobile phone now, what if in 10 years' time a lot of student housing accommodation is actually not necessary anymore and a lot will be happening via conferences?
Any
and
idea what
e-learning?
would replace it?
Stay at home.
The technology, I mean, if the technology advances, and
So
you know,
a kind of a B2B, but then for student housing.
for education.
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting sort of what-if question, because we know the what-if will happen. So everything you said.
What will you do with all the student housing that you've now finally invested in?
Yeah, and I think this is back to this, the excitement and dynamic nature of the market is what you've got to keep your eye on. And so the what-if, say, 10 years ago, what if, a significant number of universities establish branch campus overseas? What if a significant number of universities start partnering on courses? What if students, instead of doing a 3-year course, do a 2-year course? All these what-ifs have happened. There's lesser organisations are starting to happen. And, distance learning, technology, holographic technology, all these sort of things. A lecturer standing lecturing to a screen in America can have an algorithm telling people the Twitter questions, ask questions. You can ask, to stop my lecture, 3 questions coming out of this. You can answer the question on the ground. And so I think all these things will happen, and our industry will have to respond to it. And the industry will respond to it. Having said that, I think there'll still be, if anything, there'll be more travel as a result of that what if. Because I think people will be travelling to do semester courses. They might be doing some distance learning with a month or 2 stay at university campus. I don't think it'll be less students. I think it'll just be more dynamic body. And it's things like the student hotel, and that may be a snapshot in the future, maybe.
More flexible.
Nido's business in London, absolutely cracking a sort of focus on that sort of area of the market as well. So,
if there's something we've learned over the last 50 years is to be more flexible in functions, the separation in very functional assets just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
Maybe one comment actually, I mean, because I think it's a very, very good question. And my response would be, I think it's really interesting in today's world, I mean, where virtual is, everything. I mean, here you describe a place where people are coming together offline, to chat and to get together. Yeah, so is this actually an error? I don't think so. I mean, because I strongly believe marketplaces, central points where people meet, that's my understanding, will remain important. Yeah, I think it will be a combination of offline and online, but I think a student accommodation could be exactly that point where people could meet still live and in person. But I think maybe from an investment standpoint, there's a second point. Let's say it becomes irrelevant because on your iPhone next time, you just choose your, available accommodation for the next 3 months and you don't know where it is. But I think here the point is the exit strategy needs to be defined as an investor. So for example, if I look at a scheme where I know actually I can turn this into a multifamily unit without any problem, that's a good investment, right? So I know that there's an alternative use for that kind of building. If it's somewhere in the middle of nowhere, then probably I have an issue. So I think in terms of what if, we need to understand, exit risk. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, just a short comment. I think the basic point is to say that in 10 years' time and 20 years' time, students still going to need a room, a roof, and a bed. Second of all, the best educations and the best universities in this world, it's not online purchased degrees that there's the best part of them. It's a confrontation with the teacher, being with the professor, and that part of education is not going to change despite the fact that we get open online learning systems and MOOCs and all these things. What kind of boils down to is being in a learning environment with actual people in an actual room. What it's going to need, we're going to be a lot more mobile. We're going to maybe take one semester here, one semester there, and that's also why I think you can talk about a European model of housing where no matter if I'm in Copenhagen, London, or based in Berlin, there are some basic amenities that I know I'm going to get. And then there might be a rooftop somewhere or a sauna in Finland, but I know there are some basic premises I would like to have as a student, and that's not going to change within 10 years, 20 or 30 years' time. And second of all, I think it's also important to look at student welfare. As we get more fragmented, people are also a little bit younger now when they start and they move all over the world, we're going to need to be taken a little bit care of, some of these, especially the young ones, and getting into a student housing building where you know you can make friends, you know you can make connections and networks, despite the fact that you are far away from home, is going to be even more important in order for these students to thrive and actually be an actual asset to society afterwards.
So it's a Wi-Fi, a bed, and a place to meet your friends.
That is actually the most basic. I think that is the minimum that we need.
One thing I'll say, if the world of the future is we do everything online, why are Google taking a 1 million square feet office building at King's Cross in London? They're doing it because they want to put their people together. The office will be very different, but they're still.
One more question. Way in the back there.
My name is Hendrik Rood. I work as a consultant mainly in education networks, research networks, and I have done a lot of bringing networking into student dorms in the last 20 years. I have a question, it's about the location question. We have experienced that up to the mid-1990s, the most popular student dorms were the canal buildings in the old cities. They gave prestige, and you didn't want to live in a high-riser at the back of the town, where all the dorms were, where the mass was. Then we brought in these high-speed networks, 100 megabits per second in 1995, and suddenly the empty rooms in the outside high-riser buildings started to disappear. There came waiting lists for the ones who were unwanted. But we are currently approaching the point that high-speed internet facilities and all that kind of stuff, which wasn't available for the last 15 years in the inner towns, in the smaller but the more prestigious buildings, are now arriving. So maybe haven't we looked at a fluke, and currently the technology has made these high-rise student houses buildings for the last 15 years more attractive, and suddenly...
Why do you believe that?
Because this technology now arrives affordable in the smaller ones, which are more prestigious.
Yeah.
So in an inner city, a city house with 10 or 15 students didn't have the scale to put the technology in already.
Okay.
And now it starts to get a point where it may happen the next few years. And isn't this changing your market and you're misinvesting?
Anybody believing that high-speed internet access becoming much more easy to do that is a game changer? Votes? You don't get any votes here on this issue. Okay, this was the end of the morning session. thank you very much for your contribution. I think they deserve an applause.